Imagine standing on the side of this like really wide avenue, watching a massive victory parade roll past you.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right, so the confetti is raining down, the banners are just snapping in the wind, and you've got these soldiers marching in perfect formation. They're returning from a battle that secured the freedom of the entire nation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so everything you see visually, I mean, it screams absolute triumph. But as the marching band gets closer, you realize they aren't playing some bright, triumphant fanfare.
Wait, what are they playing?
That's a thing. The brass is super heavy, the tempo is slow, and the melody is this heart-wrenching minor key funeral dirge.
Oh, man. That's incredibly unsettling.
Right. The cognitive dissonance is just immediate. You're looking at a celebration of life and victory, but you are listening to the sound of profound, devastating loss.
Yeah, your brain doesn't quite know what to do with that juxtaposition. I mean, it demands that you either look away from the victory or you somehow just ignore the sorrow, because holding both of those things at the same time, it feels almost impossible.
Exactly. And that jarring, uncomfortable, yet, completely realistic tension is exactly where we're heading today. So, welcome to Reformed Thinking, our deep dive into the profound depths of biblical text.
Glad to be here.
And if you've been with us before, you know we don't do superficial readings here. We take a stack of sources, the historical context, linguistic analysis, and we really try to find the bedrock beneath the text.
We really do.
Today, our deep dive centers entirely on Psalm 9, and we are being guided by the brilliant, meticulous textual work found in the Bible Knowledge Commentary by John F. Walvoord. Because, if you just skim Psalm 9, you might mistake it for a simple, straightforward greeting card of praise.
Right, like a simple thank you, God kind of song.
Exactly. But underneath the surface, there is this complex architecture of ancient linguistics and a raw, bleeding psychological pendulum swing.
Yeah, what we're looking at today isn't a neat, clean, monolithic portrait of a biblical hero. I mean, we are looking at a man who is experiencing the vast, almost incomprehensible difference between the eternal sovereign reign of God and the terrifying frailty of mortal life.
And often in the exact same breath.
Precisely. In the very same breath.
So why should you, the listener, actually care about a poem written thousands of years ago in the ancient Near East?
It's a fair question.
Because whether you are navigating an intense personal crisis right now, or, maybe you are simply exhausted by the chaotic, terrifying rise and fall of modern geopolitical powers on the evening news, this text is going to offer you something incredibly rare.
It really does. It offers a framework that doesn't force you to choose between profound theological certainty and genuinely human terror.
Yeah.
It teaches you how to hold both. It gives you a vocabulary for the very real tension of living in a fallen world while trusting an absolutely sovereign God.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand what David is doing in Psalm 9, we actually have to step outside of it for a moment and look at the broader literary landscape.
Right, specifically its relationship to Psalm 10.
Yeah, because there is a fascinating historical mystery here, isn't there?
There really is, and it begins with the Septuagint.
Which is the Greek translation, right?
Exactly. Just for a bit of historical context for everyone,
right.
The Septuagint is the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, completed a couple of centuries before the time of Christ. And, well, if you were to unroll a scroll of the Septuagint and read through the Psalms, you actually wouldn't find Psalm 9 and Psalm 10 as two distinct separate compositions.
Wait, really?
Yeah. They're stitched together as one continuous unbroken text.
Which is just wild to consider, because if you open any modern English Bible today, which follows the Hebrew Masoretic tradition, there is a hard break. Chapter 9 ends, chapter 10 begins. And they feel incredibly different, but the Greek translators didn't just smash them together by accident, right? I mean, the commentary points out that there is actual forensic literary evidence binding these two poems together at the skeletal level.
Oh, it's definitely not a clerical error. The internal evidence is striking. I mean, the most prominent feature is the Hebrew acrostic pattern that spans across both psalms.
Right, the acrostic. So we're talking about successive stanzas beginning with successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet.
Yeah, moving from Aleph to Tav.
I know that was often used as a mnemonic device, for memorization in an oral culture, but there is a heavier theological weight to it than just a memory trick, isn't there?
Absolutely. When an ancient Hebrew poet used the full acrostic, they were making a profound literary and theological statement. By encompassing the entire alphabet, the writer is essentially saying, I am giving you the complete, exhaustive reality of this subject. I am covering this from A to Z.
Oh, I love that. Total comprehension.
Exactly. It signifies total completeness. And what's fascinating is that this acrostic structure begins perfectly in Psalm 9, but it doesn't finish there.
It spills over.
It bleeds right over the boundary and continues, albeit with some ragged, irregular breaks, all the way through the end of Psalm 10.
It's like finding a bridge where the suspension cables are anchored in two completely different land masses. I mean, you just can't ignore the cables.
You really can't.
But it's not just the acrostic structure, is it? There are very specific linguistic fingerprints they share.
Yes, the vocabulary overlap is highly unusual. The commentary draws our attention to the specific Hebrew phrase translated as "in times of trouble."
Okay.
You find it in Psalm 9, verse 9, and then it echoes again in Psalm 10, verse 18. That exact phrasing is incredibly rare. I mean, it only appears in 2 other places in the entire Psalter.
Wow. Just 2 other places.
Right. Furthermore, both Psalms share a deep, recurring thematic focus on the nations, these opposing, hostile Gentile forces surrounding God's people.
Right. The external threat.
Yes. And, perhaps most tellingly, they both conclude on the exact same philosophical chord.
Which is what?
A stark, sobering meditation on the frailty of mortal man.
So the forensic evidence is undeniable. They share a structural skeleton, they share rare vocabulary, and they drive toward the exact same conclusion. But here is the massive problem, and, well, this is why Walvoord's commentary and the Hebrew tradition ultimately warrant separating them.
Yeah, the tone.
The emotional tone between the two is like walking out of a bright, sunlit room directly into a freezing, pitch-black cellar.
It is extreme emotional whiplash. Psalm 9, for the most part, is a triumphant song of thanksgiving. David is rejoicing over a concrete vindication. The enemy has been destroyed.
Victory is secured.
But the moment you cross the textual boundary into Psalm 10, the triumph evaporates. The author is suddenly crying out in the dark, asking why God is standing far off while the wicked prosper and hunt down the innocent.
It makes me think of the way we consume media today, like a double album.
Yeah.
You have side A, which is Psalm 9. It's the victory march. The lyrics are about the enemy being crushed and God reigning supreme. But then you flip the vinyl over to side B, which is Psalm 10, and it's this melancholy, desperate midnight reflection. The hero, who is just celebrating the victory, is now sitting alone in the dark, paralyzed by the reality that evil is still prowling outside his door.
That's an excellent way to conceptualize it. It really captures the mood shift.
But I want to push on the psychology of this for a second. If we accept the possibility that these were composed as one continuous emotional thought, or at least deeply linked by the author, what does that tell us about David's mental state?
It tells us a lot, actually.
Because to our modern minds, we want our heroes stable. We want them to either be the conquering king or the weeping victim. How can a human brain pivot from the ultimate soaring triumph of Psalm 9 to feeling completely overwhelmed and abandoned in Psalm 10?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of human neurobiology and trauma, it actually makes perfect sense.
Really? How so?
In moments of intense crisis, say a battle or a prolonged period of being hunted, which David experienced for years, the human body is flooded with adrenaline.
Right. Fight or flight.
Exactly. You survive the immediate threat, and your immediate reaction is profound, overwhelming relief and praise. That's the Psalm 9 experience. God delivered you. The enemy at the gates is gone.
You're alive.
You're alive. But what happens a day later?
The adrenaline drops.
The adrenaline plummets. The immediate threat is gone, but the nervous system is still deeply dysregulated.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, the mind begins to scan the horizon for the next threat, and suddenly the overarching reality of a broken, hostile world comes crashing back down. You realize that while one enemy was defeated, wickedness itself wasn't eradicated.
Right. There's always another enemy.
There are still corrupt judges. There are still oppressors in the streets. That realization leads directly to the despair of Psalm 10.
So it's not like bipolar theology. It's a remarkably accurate portrayal of a human being processing survival in a fallen world.
Exactly. It validates the believer's experience. You can experience a miraculous, undeniable deliverance on Tuesday, sing God's praises with total sincerity, and by Thursday night find yourself weeping in your kitchen because a new systemic threat is looming.
That is so relatable.
It is. Knowing these two psalms are structurally bound gives us theological permission to inhabit both realities.
That sets the stage perfectly for us to drop the needle on side A. We are going to look specifically at the victory march of Psalm 9. But as I mentioned in the beginning, this victory parade has a very disturbing soundtrack.
We see that right away in the superscription, the introductory notes before verse 1.
Right. It says the psalm is ascribed to David, which fits everything we know about his life of warfare and worship. But then it gives a musical direction.
Yeah, a very specific one.
It says it is meant to be sung to the tune of Muth Laban, which translates to the death of the sun. And according to the historical research, we have absolutely no idea what that melody was. It is completely lost to history.
It's one of the great silences of antiquity. We possess the exact lyrical content, but the musical vehicle that carried it has vanished.
It's haunting. It's like finding a lyric sheet in an archive for a song that, was incredibly famous, but the audio file has been permanently corrupted.
That's a great analogy.
We can read the words, but we can't feel the tempo, the cadence, or the harmonic resolution, but just the title itself, The Death of the Sun. It tells us something profound. I mean, you don't name a cheerful, upbeat, major key folk dance The Death of the Sun.
No, definitely not.
That title implies a dirge. It implies grief, mourning, and deep visceral loss.
Which creates that jarring dissonance we talked about at the beginning. Because when you look at verses 1 and 2, David is not mourning. He resolves with his entire being to praise God.
Yeah, it's a total contrast.
He says, I will give thanks to you, Lord, with all my heart. I will tell of all your wonderful deeds. I will be glad and rejoice in you.
And the commentary focuses intensely on the specific Hebrew word David uses for these wonderful deeds. It's the word nipyo.
Yes, nipyo. It is a crucial theological term in the Old Testament.
So what separates a nipyo from just a regular everyday blessing? Because we often use the word wonderful to describe like a good cup of coffee or finding a parking spot in the rain. I imagine David isn't talking about that.
Not at all. Nipyo comes from a root that means to be beyond one's power to do or to be difficult to comprehend.
Oh, so it's out of our hands entirely.
Completely. It doesn't refer to the ordinary providence of God like the sun rising or the rain falling, which are blessings, of course. Nipyo refers to the extraordinary, the surpassing, the miraculous interventions that alter the course of history and defy natural explanation.
Give me an example from the ancient texts. Like, what would they consider nipyo?
The plagues in Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, the collapse of the walls of Jericho.
Okay, massive events.
These are nipyo. They are the moments where the sovereign God reaches down and actively disrupts the natural order to execute his will and deliver his people. They are cosmic flexes of divine power.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. David is saying, I am going to sing with all my heart about God's mind-bending, history-altering, reality-shattering cosmic power, and I'm going to sing it to the tune of a funeral march about a dying son.
The contrast is unbelievable.
Right. Why? Why not set this to the most triumphant, upbeat melody in the royal archives?
Because biblical praise is never divorced from the gritty reality of the fall. What's fascinating here is that David implicitly understands that true, enduring worship often emerges from the crucible of profound suffering.
Wow.
If you only praise God when the sun is shining, when your bank account is full, and when everyone you love is perfectly healthy, your theology is brittle. It's untested.
It's fair weather faith. It just shatters the second the temperature drops.
Precisely. But when you can look at the smoking ruins of a battlefield, when you can feel the sting of actual loss, and yet still deliberately choose to recount the niplo, the extraordinary wonders of God.
That takes something completely different.
That is an unstoppable, militant kind of faith. Singing the victory lyrics over the sorrowful melody grounds the praise in reality. It says, yes, there is death, yes, there is sorrow, but God's sovereign deliverance surpasses it all.
That is such a heavy challenge for you listening right now. I mean, how often do you wait for the circumstances of your life to be perfectly resolved before you offer genuine praise?
We all do it.
We think we need a clean, major key melody in our lives to sing about God's goodness. But David is showing us that you can bring your grief, your anxiety, your death of the son, dirge, and you can lay the truth of God's surpassing wonders right over the top of it. You don't have to ignore the pain to declare the victory.
In fact, the victory is magnified against the backdrop of that pain.
Absolutely. So what exactly was the specific, extraordinary wonder that David had just witnessed? What triggered this profound outpouring of praise? That leads us directly into verses 3 through 6, where we see the sheer, unadulterated annihilation of the enemy.
David moves from his internal resolution to praise out to the external historical facts. He is reacting to a concrete event. God has manifested his righteous judgment by utterly dismantling the enemies who were seeking David's destruction.
And we really need to pause and examine the language of this destruction because the commentary is very clear that this isn't just a minor military setback for the enemy. It isn't a skirmish where they retreated over the hill to regroup.
No, the vocabulary is absolute and terminal. David says his enemies turn back, they stumble, and they perish before God. But verse 5 takes it to a level of totality that is difficult for us to fully grasp today.
Let's read it.
He says, "You have rebuked the nations and destroyed the wicked. You've blotted out their name forever and ever."
Blotted out their name. I mean, that feels so much heavier than just saying they were killed in battle.
It is heavier. In the ancient Near East, a person's name, their Shem, was everything. It was their essence, their reputation, their legacy. It was their claim to existence.
Kings would carve their names into massive stone monuments, specifically so they would be remembered forever.
Right, exactly. They obsessed over legacy. To have your name blotted out meant that you were not merely defeated in battle. It meant you were expunged from the timeline of history. It is the active, deliberate erasure of your memory. Verse 6 continues this, saying their cities are uprooted, and even the memory of them has perished.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here because to our modern 21st century sensibilities, this sounds horrifying.
It definitely jars modern readers.
We live in a world that, at least culturally, values diplomacy, the preservation of historical artifacts, and human rights. We have the Geneva Conventions. So when we read a text where a biblical hero is celebrating the utter erasure of an entire people group, their cities demolished, their history deleted, it sounds like the gloating of a tyrant.
Right.
How do we reconcile this absolute devastating annihilation with the idea that God is a good and righteous judge?
This raises an important question, and honestly, it's one of the great stumbling blocks for people reading the Old Testament. If we read this through the lens of petty human tribalism, my team beat your team, so I'm happy you're dead, then yes, it is morally repulsive.
Right.
But that is fundamentally misreading the text and the theology behind it.
So how should we read it? How does the commentary frame it?
We have to center verse 4, where David says to God, "You sat on the throne, judging righteously." This isn't about David's personal vengeance. This is about cosmic justice. We must remember the historical reality of the nations surrounding ancient Israel.
Give us some context on them.
These were not innocent, peaceful democracies just trying to mind their own business. The Canaanite, Philistines, and surrounding empires were characterized by systematic brutality, the horrific exploitation of the weak, and religious systems built on things like child sacrifice.
They were deeply structurally wicked.
Yes, to their core, they were oppressive machines. And for a holy God to simply tolerate their continued existence, to allow them to endlessly crush the innocent, would actually be a profound injustice.
I mean, if a judge today lets a serial killer walk free, we wouldn't call that judge merciful. We'd call him corrupt.
Exactly. True righteousness requires the cessation of evil. So when God moves to completely dismantle these regimes, to uproot their cities and blot out their names, it is the ultimate vindication of the good. It is the removal of a cancer.
I see. So the celebration isn't bloodlust. It's the relief of the oppressed realizing the nightmare is permanently over.
Exactly. And look at the contrast David sets up to highlight this. In verse 6, the arrogant, wicked nations who try to carve their names in stone are reduced to absolute nothingness.
Yeah.
But then verse 7 hits like a thunderclap. The Lord reigns forever. He has established his throne for judgment.
Oh, the juxtaposition is brilliant. The fragile temporal empires built on violence, they just crumble into dust. But the righteous throne of God is completely immovable.
It is the ultimate reality check on human hubris. You can build all the monuments you want, but if your empire is built on wickedness, the eternal judge will eventually erase it.
So if the eternal judge acts with that kind of terrifying finality against the wicked, what does that mean for the people who are being crushed by them? When the dust settles from the destruction of the enemy, what does God become for the victim?
That brings us to the architecture of divine safety in verses 7 through 10.
Because God is this unstoppable force against evil, he simultaneously becomes an impenetrable refuge for the oppressed. Right. David declares that the Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble.
And this is where Walvoord's commentary really shines, because it takes us into a deep linguistic dive into the Hebrew vocabulary of safety.
I love this part.
It turns out ancient Hebrew doesn't just have one generic catch-all word for safe. It possesses a highly nuanced topological vocabulary for exactly how God protects his people.
The precision of the biblical authors is just breathtaking. They understood that different types of crises require different types of security. Let's look at the three specific Hebrew words the commentary highlights here. The first is misko. It's used twice in verse 9.
Right. Misko.
What exactly does that look like in the mind of an ancient Israelite?
Misko implies security through elevation and inaccessibility. That's a topographical term that envisions a high, craggy cliff face or a mountain peak.
Like an eagle's nest.
Yes. Think of the stronghold of Masada or the sheer cliffs of En-Gedi, where David actually hid from King Saul. It's a place where the enemy can see you, but they physically cannot reach you. It requires an arduous climb, and it is easily defensible.
So if I'm translating that to a modern mindset, Mistua is the impenetrable mountain castle. It's massive, structural, long-term security. You live in the Misko. You can sleep soundly there knowing the walls are 10 feet thick and the iron gates are barred.
Precisely.
That's
It's
it.
permanence. But you aren't always near a mountain castle when danger strikes. Which brings us to the second word, Misa.
Masa. I'm guessing this serves a different function.
Yes. Masa translates more directly to a shelter from danger, specifically immediate, sudden danger. It carries the connotation of a localized cover you dive under when something unexpected happens, like a sudden desert rainstorm, a flash flood in a wadi, or a sudden volley of arrows.
Okay, so if Mishton's the mountain castle, Masa is the storm cellar.
That's it.
You're out working in the field, the sky suddenly turns that sickly green color, the tornado sirens start screaming, and you don't have time to travel to a castle. You just need to pull the heavy iron doors of the root cellar over your head right now until the violent winds pass over. It's emergency duck and cover security.
That's a perfect way to graph the distinction. And then we have the third word the commentary notes, which is monos.
Monos, what's the nuance there?
Monos is highly active. It means a place to flee to. It emphasizes the actual physical movement of escaping. It is the destination you are desperately running toward when the enemy is literally on your heels and your adrenaline is maxed out.
Okay, so that's the getaway car. The engine is idling, the passenger door is flung open, and it is your immediate avenue of escape from a present pursuing threat. You don't build a life in the getaway car, but it saves your life in that critical, breathless second.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of God's providence, the theological implication here is staggering.
Let's hear it.
In human systems, whether in the ancient world or today, the vulnerable have very few options.
Yeah.
If you're poor, marginalized, or oppressed, you don't have a castle, you don't have a storm cellar, and you definitely don't have a getaway car. You are just exposed.
You are totally at the mercy of the elements and the oppressors.
Completely exposed. But David is declaring that the sovereign God of the universe, the same God who erases wicked empires, stoops down to become the exact, precise architectural security that the afflicted need in any given moment.
Wow.
He is the Mijon when they need long-term stability. He is the Mesa when the sudden storm hits. He is the Manos when they are running for their lives.
He perfectly contours himself to the shape of your crisis. And knowing this, knowing that God is this multidimensional, perfectly tailored security, David says in verse 10, "Those who know your name trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you."
And out of that profound trust, David erupts into exhortation. In verses 11 and 12, he turns to the congregation and says, "Sing praises to the Lord enthroned in Zion. Proclaim among the nations what he has done." He is so convinced of this theology of safety that he wants the whole world to hear it.
It is a soaring, magnificent theological peak, but this is exactly where the poem does something shocking, because as we know, theology is just theory until it is tested in the dark.
It really is.
What you proclaim on the sunny mountain peak has to survive the valley of the shadow of death. And right here, literally in the very next breath, the text plummets.
We move into verses 13 and 14.
David goes from exhorting the nations to sing praises straight into a desperate, raw plea for his own survival. Verse 13, "Lord, see how my enemies persecute me. Have mercy and lift me up from the gates of death, that I may declare your praises in the gates of daughter Zion."
The transition gives you whiplash.
I mean, we really have to pause here. He just spent 12 verses declaring that God has utterly destroyed the enemy, blotted out their names, and established a perfect, impenetrable fortress. And now he is begging God to notice that he is being actively persecuted and dragged toward the gates of death.
It's jarring.
Did David forget what he just wrote? Is this a massive theological contradiction?
It isn't a contradiction. It is a masterclass in the deepest reality of biblical faith. Theologians often refer to this paradigm as the already but not yet.
That is a crucial concept. Explain how that works in this context.
The already is the objective truth of God's ultimate victory. David knows with absolute theological certainty that the wicked are doomed and God is sovereign. In the grand, eternal scope of reality, the war is won. The throne is established. That is the already.
The check is in the bank.
Exactly. But David is still a mortal man living in the not yet. He is living in the immediate temporal reality of a fallen world where evil still wields temporary, localized power. The sword is still sharp, the enemies are still vicious, and the pain is still visceral.
So the outcome of the war is guaranteed, but the enemy is currently in David's front yard trying to break down the door.
Exactly. And David illustrates this brutal tension by using the spatial imagery of two very different sets of gates. First, he describes himself being pulled down toward the gates of death.
What did the gates signify in the ancient world? We think of gates as just a fence, but it meant more back then, didn't it?
Much more. The gates of an ancient city were the center of civic life. It was where the elders sat, where legal judgments were rendered, where commerce happened. It was the seat of power and jurisdiction.
So it's like City Hall and the courthouse combined.
Right, so when David speaks of the gates of death, which the commentary notes is imagery shared with Joel and Isaiah, he is talking about the realm of Sheol. He is saying that death is trying to assert legal jurisdiction over him. The gates of death represent an irreversible threshold into silence, darkness, and the cessation of earthly praise.
The ultimate suffocating dead end.
Right. But he begs God to snatch him away from those dark gates, so that he might stand in the second set of gates, the gates of the daughter of Zion.
The gates of Jerusalem.
Specifically, the place where the presence of God dwelt. The gates of Zion represent the exact opposite of the gates of death. They're a place of light, of life, of community, and most importantly, of loud, vocal, joyful praise. David wants to be brought from the silence of death into the vibrant community of worship.
Think about the tension of this for a moment. You, the listener, are navigating your own life. You might possess a deep, reformed, rock-solid theological confidence in the absolute sovereignty of God. You know the end of the story. You know the eternal throne is secure.
Amen to that.
But simultaneously, you might be crying out in the middle of the night because you feel the terrifying gravity of the gates of death pulling at you. That could be a devastating medical diagnosis, an impending financial collapse, or a battle with suffocating depression.
And what Psalm 9 demonstrates so beautifully is that feeling the terror of the not yet does not invalidate your faith in the already.
Exactly. It means your faith is authentic. You can sing the victory song of God's sovereignty and beg for your life in the exact same breath, and God's shoulders are broad enough to handle both. He doesn't demand that we pretend we aren't terrified just because we know He is in control.
He welcomes the honest cry of the afflicted.
So David is caught in this tension. He is asking God to intervene, to save him from the people trying to push him through the gates of death. But that leaves a mechanical question. We know God ultimately judges the wicked, but how does he do it in this instance? Does he throw lightning bolts? Does he send an army of angels?
That brings us to verses 15 through 18, where we see what I like to call the ultimate boomerang effect of divine justice.
Let's look at the text. Verse 15 says, "The nations have fallen into the pit they have dug. Their feet are caught in the net they have hidden."
The commentary suggests that this section might be written as a confidence motif.
What does that mean?
Well, David is so profoundly certain of how God's justice operates that he describes the future downfall of his enemies as a completed past tense fact.
And the mechanism he describes is fascinating. It's not a direct kinetic strike from heaven. It's self-executing.
Yes. The wicked devise elaborate, malicious traps to destroy the innocent. They dig pits, they hide nets. But the justice of God is revealed in the fact that the wicked inevitably stumble into their own traps.
So what does this all mean in practice? If you'll indulge a slightly ridiculous analogy for a deeply serious theological concept, it makes me think of the old Wile E. Coyote cartoons.
Oh, I can see where you're going with this.
Right. He spends the entire episode obsessively trying to destroy the Roadrunner. He orders giant anvils from Acme. He paints fake tunnels on the side of cliffs. He rigs these incredibly complex tripwires with dynamite.
Yeah, and it never works.
Every single time, without fail, the Roadrunner just stops, looks at him, speeds off, and the complex trap backfires completely. The anvil drops on the coyote's own head. The dynamite blows up in his own hands. The hubris of the villain is that they always assume they are immune to the physics of the trap they built.
While it's a humorous image, it perfectly encapsulates the profound theological reality of sin. Sin and wickedness are fundamentally structurally unsound.
Unpack that. What do you mean structurally unsound?
Evil is parasitic. It relies on the good structures of God's creation to exist, but it attempts to pervert them. When a wicked ruler or an oppressive system tries to build an empire on violence, deception, and exploitation, they are using materials that are guaranteed to collapse.
Because it goes against the grain of reality.
Precisely. You cannot build a lasting structure in God's universe using rebellion against God as your mortar.
So when they dig a pit for the righteous, they are actually hollowing out the ground they themselves are standing on.
Exactly. The Reformed tradition has historically emphasized this. Often, the most terrifying judgment God can inflict upon the wicked is simply to hand them over to the natural consequences of their own depravity. He removes his restraining grace and lets the evil consume itself.
That's sobering.
Verse 16 says, "The Lord is known by his acts of justice. The wicked are ensnared by the work of their hands." God doesn't always have to strike them directly. He simply ensures that the moral physics of the universe remain absolute. Evil collapses inward.
And verse 17 gives us the ultimate destination of that inward collapse. The wicked return to the grave, all the nations that forget God.
And here we find an incredibly deep linguistic and theological concept that the commentary highlights surrounding this idea of forgetting God.
Because in English, forgetting is usually a passive, innocent thing. I forgot to take out the trash. I forgot where I left my keys. It's just a slip of the mind.
But in the biblical Hebrew worldview, particularly in the poetic literature, forgetting and remembering are not about mental retention. They are highly charged, active, moral postures.
Give me the contrast. What does it mean to remember?
To remember, God in the Psalms is synonymous with active faith, obedience, and prayer. When God remembers his covenant, he acts to save. When a person remembers God, they actively align their life, their decisions, and their trust with his reality.
So it's an action, not just a thought.
Right. Therefore, to forget God is not a passive lapse in memory. It is a deliberate, active, willful suppression of the truth. It is the conscious decision to push God out of your reality so that you can ascend to the throne of your own life and act as your own sovereign.
It's like looking at the sun and willfully choosing to staple your eyelids shut so you can claim you invented light.
It is the ultimate delusion, and that willful amnesia, that active rejection of the sovereign judge, leaves the wicked with zero hope. Because if you actively erase the only true fortress, the Mishigo, from your reality, when the inevitable collapse of your own evil occurs, you have absolutely nowhere to run except into the pit you dug.
Which is contrasted immediately in verse 18. But God will never forget the needy. The hope of the afflicted will never perish. God's active remembering of the helpless is their salvation.
Which brings David to his grand, sweeping conclusion. The realization of this willful amnesia of the wicked, this delusion that they are gods, leads him to utter a final, devastating prayer in verses 19 and 20.
David prays, "Arise, Lord. Do not let mortals triumph. Let the nations be judged in your presence. Strike them with terror, Lord. Let the nations know they are but mortal."
And the commentary does a laser-focused dive into the specific Hebrew word David uses here for mortal. It is the word nosh.
Nosher. Now, biblical Hebrew has several words for man, right?
It does. You have Adam, referring to mankind generally. You have Ish, which often denotes a man of high degree or a champion. But David intentionally chooses no.
Why that one?
This word doesn't just mean a biological human. Its root carries the connotation of being weak, frail, sickly, and profoundly mortal. It emphasizes the absolute vulnerability of the human condition. It is the vocabulary of dust.
The vocabulary of dust. That is a chilling way to phrase it.
This raises an important question, though. Why do human beings oppress each other in the first place? Where does the cruelty of empires, the arrogance of wicked nations, or even the petty tyrannies in our own lives come from?
Where does it come from?
David is suggesting that at the root of all oppression, all of these elaborate pits and nets, is a fundamental delusion. The wicked have forgotten they are Yonosh. They have amassed wealth, built armies, conquered cities, and somewhere along the line, they began to believe their own propaganda.
They think they're untouchable.
They act as if they are sovereign, eternal deities who hold the power of life and death over others.
They forget that they are made of dirt. They forget that a microscopic virus, a stray arrow, or a tiny blood clot can end their majestic reign in a fraction of a second.
Exactly. So when David prays for God to strike them with terror, he isn't just asking for them to be frightened for the sake of punishment. He's asking God to initiate a forceful, unavoidable reality check.
He's asking God to hold up a mirror.
A terrifying, illuminating mirror. The judgment of God strips away the illusion of autonomy. It forces the wicked to look at themselves and realize they are not gods. They are nosh. Frail, dying creatures who have absolutely no right and no actual power to oppress those who take refuge in the eternal judge.
It is the ultimate deconstruction of human pride.
It levels the entirety of human history before the throne of God.
Let's synthesize this whole incredible journey because the ground we've covered in this text is massive. We started by looking at a man who was caught in the whiplash between miraculous deliverance and terrifying vulnerability, standing on the bridge between Psalm 9 and Psalm 10.
We did.
We heard him sing of God's mind-bending, extraordinary wonders, the niplo, but we heard him sing it to the sorrowful, grieving tune of the death of the Son, proving that the most profound praise is forged in the fires of reality.
We saw the absolute, uncompromising justice of God, who doesn't just slap the wrist of the oppressor, but uproots their cities and blots out their memory forever.
And we climbed into the architecture of divine safety. We saw that God is the high mountain castle of the Miskon, he is the storm cellar of the Masa, and he is the getaway car of the Manos. He perfectly fits the shape of our deepest need.
We stood in the agonizing tension between the gates of death and the gates of Zion, acknowledging that we can hold deep theological certainty about God's final victory while still weeping over the current battles in the not yet.
We watched the boomerang of divine justice, where the elaborate traps of the wicked structurally collapse on their own heads because evil cannot sustain itself in God's universe. And finally, we ended with the stark, devastating realization that every human empire, every arrogant tyrant is nothing more than, fragile, mortal dust.
It really is a theological masterpiece. It covers the entirety of the human experience and the divine character.
And as we always say here, this is not just an ancient artifact to be admired in a museum. This brings us to the so what for you listening right now. We live in a cultural moment characterized by relentless anxiety.
That's an understatement.
The screens in our pockets feed us a 24/7 drip of information about oppressive regimes, corrupt systems, and terrifying cultural shifts. It is incredibly easy to feel like the wicked are winning, that the pits they are digging are too deep and the nets are too wide.
But Psalm 9 serves as a massive, immovable anchor. It reminds us that we are not required to hold the moral arc of the universe together. We do not have to carry the weight of cosmic justice on our shoulders. That responsibility belongs exclusively to the sovereign judge who sits on an eternal throne, who actively remembers the cry of the afflicted, and who ensures that evil will ultimately devour itself.
You don't have to win the cosmic war, you just have to run to the fortress. Which brings me to a final provocative thought that I want to leave you with, something for you to mull over in the quiet moments after this audio stops playing. Let's hear it. We spent a lot of time talking about how the wicked forget God, how it is an active, willful amnesia, a suppression of the truth so they can build their own empires. And we talked about how they delude themselves into forgetting that they are just fragile dust. Here is my question for you.
I'm listening.
In what subtle, everyday, deeply acceptable ways do you actively forget your own frailty? How often do you exhaust yourself, burning through your peace, your joy, and your health, desperately trying to build your own impenetrable fortresses of financial security, reputational control, or relational dominance? Are you secretly trying to be a sovereign god over your own tiny, fragile kingdom? Or are you willing to finally let go of the illusion of control, accept the beautiful, liberating reality that you are just Nonosh, and flee to the stronghold of the only eternal king?
Wow.
You don't have to exhaust yourself building the castle, you just have to know the God who owns it. Think about that today.